So here we are, the beginning of a new podcast slash social media channel. I'm going to see how many platforms I can put this on. But the whole point is people, I feel like, have forgotten how to think, or they're not taught anymore, or they're just lazy. Everybody just wants to jump on the bandwagon of whatever group they most align with and just stick with all their points. And this goes for right wing, left wing, whatever religious institution or persuasion or person you follow. Even the other podcasters you might listen to, or other people online, different people that you follow, mentors. All of it is usually full of some wisdom, some goodness. There's good things to be found in every person, even somebody who has 90% bad. There's something you can learn from them. Not that you should emulate any of the bad, but the critical thinking idea of just being willing to look for the good in everything and not being afraid to look for the good in wild and weird places, on the edges, on the fringes, and not being afraid to look for the good in the mainstream, to not always assume that the fringes have the answers and to not always assume the mainstream has the answers. I find as I gotten in a lot of discussions slash arguments with people, mostly on different social media, that there's the camp of people who believe the mainstream and anything fringe, they call you cuckoo. And then there's the people who believe the mainstream is stuck in an old boys club. They're, stuck in their ways. They feel threatened by change and they feel comfortable with things the way they are, the status quo, so they don't let anybody innovate or push the edge of thinking and building into better and newer positive directions. And these two camps, a lot of times people in each camp will not go to the other side. People who are always used to looking for the alternative method, they don't like using mainstream ideas. And people who are always used to the safe mainstream, they'll never go with anything alternative because they think it's kooky. And the truth is, both could be wrong. Both could be right in different ways. And there's really the best way to never know is to be afraid to investigate, to be afraid to look into other camps, to cross boundaries, to go explore, hang out with people who think different than you and ask them questions instead of just assuming they know nothing or they're wrong. But then also don't lose your own values. Don't assume because you're going with unusual people who you originally thought were wrong and now they seem like a lot of nice people with great ideas. That doesn't mean all their ideas are necessarily right. That doesn't mean behind closed doors they don't become those very people that you thought were wrong in the first place. Like, you could be very right about them and they could be wrong, or you could be wrong about them and they could be right, or a mixture of both. So what I'm getting at is be brave, be wild, let your thoughts go into uncharted territory. Think about things that might be taboo and don't be afraid to investigate. I think this is what Jordan Peterson and others call the shadow side of yourself, those dark thoughts and dark desires and ideas that are too taboo to even look at. Not saying that you should pursue them and you should let yourself become a worse version of yourself by following things you know are wrong, but you shouldn't be afraid to investigate, why do you have desires for things that might be outside the norm? What is your soul really searching for? As you dive into these questions, it'll help you understand yourself better and understand, again, what does your soul want and how does the greatest complete fulfillment come? These are the questions everybody looks for in philosophy, in religion, in cults. This is what makes cults so attractive, because they say absolutely, definitely, 100%, we have all the answers. And that's very comforting to people who feel like everything is shaky. Everything, there's no solid thing to believe in. As soon as you believe in vegetables being the way, you find out that no, meat is better for you. And if too much meat is bad for you, you try to go all vegetables. And like, you could listen to 10 different people and find out that every single thing, every single type of food is killing you. Every single type of food is the one food you should avoid. And this other food is the food you should definitely eat, that some other person will say is the one food you should avoid. So that's just food. Like, the whole world is like that. So many things are contradictory, that where do you stand? Where do you feel safe? And so people who are afraid will cling to somebody who says, I have all the answers. This is the way. And me personally, I am not saying I have any answers at all. I am not saying I even begin to know where to look. All I'm saying is, why are we afraid to look? Why are we afraid to look at anything, anywhere, any type of thing, and uncover what's underneath it? And you might say, oh no, tons of people are doing that. But are they? I can think of like 5 topics off the top of my head. I'm not going to bring them up here, but right now, but 5 topics that if I even brought them up as a thought experiment, the whole world would come and shut them down, because we've all agreed that those things are horrible. For example, think about how people did things not even 1,000 years ago, just 100 years ago. People lived such different lives that the mainstream of what a lot of things people did 100 years ago would be considered today not only taboo, but worthy of going to prison. If you go back 200 years, pretty much the whole world had slaves. And do I want to explore why that was a good idea to go back to that? Of course, that would be, that would be silly. But what was the mentality back then? How are people thinking differently that the whole world didn't rise up against it and end it sooner? Why did it take thousands of years for the thinking to get to a level where enough people were willing to fight to say, no, this is wrong, we need to end it? What kind of were those people just more evil than we are today? Are we better? I don't think so at all. I don't think we hold a candle to them in some of their integrity and their character. But if I say that, we have less character than people who used to own slaves, that sentence sounds horrible. And of course, I'm not saying it that way, but that's where people's minds jump immediately when you try to bring up some kind of wild thought like that. There's a bunch of them. Life was very different. The way children were raised is completely different. If you go back even 30 years, but 100 years, you go back 100 years and strangers could discipline your children and nobody would care. Parents wouldn't care. Oh, thank you for doing that. I didn't realize he was too far out of earshot, or he was around the corner. I didn't know he was getting into trouble. You disciplined him for me. Thank you so much. Can you see that happening today? No, parents would call the police. And what does discipline mean? That's a whole topic in and of itself with a lot of taboo around it. There's parenting ideas today that don't believe you should even say no to a child, or you should ever raise your voice to your own child as you're raising them. I'm sure there's wild ideas out there that say you shouldn't even call it raising, that maybe you should let the child raise you. Like, there's so many ideas out there that are so contradictory with other ideas. And the Socratic method is basically to just keep asking questions. Why? Why is it this way? Okay, well, why is that way? And once you get an answer, you just keep asking a question. You open up another answer. That brings another question. You ask it. You find the answers. And you just keep on separating the myths and the confusion, and try to find what is the most solid thing at the bottom of everything on any topic. That's critical thinking. That's deep, exciting, what I find like refreshing, stimulating. Like, I love deep discussions like that. But so many people are afraid of taboo ideas. I bet half the people immediately are thinking of putting a nasty comment because I even mentioned the S word about how people used to treat their fellow man just 200 years ago. But there's a ton of them. Most women were married off as soon as they could bear children, which sometimes was 14, 15, 16, sometimes 19. 150 years ago, if a woman made it to age 21 without finding a husband, she could be referred to as an old maid. Meanwhile, men were expected to build a career and be able to provide for a whole family sometimes before even being considered to be worthy of taking a wife. And that imbalance would force men to have to start looking for a wife as late as their late 20s, early 30s, whereas women would be expected to be chosen in marriage 14, 15, 16, 17. So you have a 34-year-old marrying a 15-year-old, considered completely normal. All people cared about was it a good match? Could he provide? And would she make a good mother and wife? Nobody on earth said those ages are insane. Nowadays, just saying this out loud, people will start calling you horrible names and will start telling you you must have terrible thoughts and terrible desires. But not even advocating that we should go back to something like that. Just saying, why are we afraid to even talk about that? Why are we even afraid to talk about how things used to be? All of Western civilization, which this podcast is coming from, and not that other civilizations don't have a universe to offer, but Western civilization, where I come from, was built mostly on the Judeo-Christian Bible, and you can find hundreds of beautiful passages that resonate with almost everybody about loving other people the way you want to be loved, treating other people the way you want to be treated, even loving your enemies, conflict resolution, how to be wise, how to be diligent and healthy and strong in all your ways. But you can also find verses in that same voluminous, how do you say it? It's actually a collection of 66 separate books or more, depending if you accept the Apocrypha, as the Catholic Church does, or less if you only go with the Judaic Hebrew Bible. But basically, within this huge section of books, you can find verses and stories about horrible tragedies, awful things. You can find people who are considered the heroes in these stories saying horrendously disgusting things about their enemies, things that I'm not going to say out loud in this introductory video, but I'm not afraid to discuss. I don't want to be afraid to discuss anything. I want to bring anything up on the table and say, why can't we talk about this? Obviously you want to be careful of your audience, but anyone can shut this off, tune this out, and hopefully anyone still has some ability to control their children to shut something off and not let their children watch something that isn't appropriate for them. So aside from those audiences that it might not be appropriate for, is there anything on the table that we don't want to talk about, that we don't want to dive into, so we can learn more about ourselves, more about humanity, and more about what are the answers to all the questions in life that we're all seeking? This is what I want to talk about. Who wants to join the discussion? What taboo topic has been on your brain that you think, I can't say this out loud usually, but it bothers me that I can't because it's an interesting topic? Do you know that 150 years ago, employers in a lot of professions could spank their employees? Not necessarily always in all situations, but definitely with apprentices who are sometimes age 17 to 22. It wasn't uncommon for high up bosses to actually discipline their employees for doing the work wrong, for breaking something, with actual physical corporal punishment of some kind. That's insane. But the further back you go in history, there's a lot of hitting going on, a lot of everybody hitting everybody. And really, very few people could escape unless you were the king. And even if you were the king, then there could be a mutiny and they could just take you out. So it was a much more brutal, violent time. And yet, with all of that brutality comes a deep humility and a deep sobriety that I think we lack in this overabundance of lighthearted, tickle your senses, over dopamine addicted, stimulated world where basically we have air conditioning and climate control and all the medicines people in the past never had, Basically, we have a million ways to make ourselves super comfortable and never have to experience hardly any pain. And of course, you know that's not true, because pain has a way of finding you anyway in a million different ways. But we don't live with that constant brutality that I got to get my work done fast and correct, or I'm going to get smacked by my boss as an adult. Never mind children. You don't even want to know what kind of brutality children endured, or wives. And a lot of this still goes on in parts of the world that we don't see very often from a Western perspective. So it's not even talking about 200 years ago. Sometimes this is still going on in a lot of the world. Some of the stuff I'm mentioning is going on in the majority of the world, but we don't think of it as a majority because we're in this little bubble in the West. And if you're outside the West watching this, you're probably laughing at us, because you think how easy we have it. I think how easy we have it very often. I feel guilty that I'm not using the incredible gift I've been given of all this comfort and luxury and wealth, and doing more with my life, with my time, with my energy, pushing myself harder. Why can't I push myself harder? I don't have it nearly as hard as my grandparents or great-grandparents or further back. I'm always asking questions like that. Like, what is it at the heart of man that seeks these things? And what can we learn from the past? What do we never want to repeat from the past? But why are we afraid to talk about those things, even as the very things we don't want to ever do again? Why can't we talk about them? Why can't we talk about why people felt the need to do them at the time? And these aren't isolated things. These are universal things. And then you have isolated things too. You have small pockets of communities that would do really weird, bizarre, horrible things that were even condemned in their time. What made them do those things? And who's to say that couldn't happen again today? The more you dive into humanity, the more you find, as the one verse in the Bible says, there's really nothing new under the sun. The things you think are crazy, wild, and new have been done many times by many people in many places, but that doesn't mean they're still not exciting and refreshing to uncover, discuss, learn about. So here we are. These are my wild thoughts, and I think they're actually pretty tame. So I invite you to come and help me dive in to see how wild we can get and not be afraid of any topic, any taboo, not be afraid to dig in and discuss and go deep and examine something from every angle and not shy away from any little crevice and little corner that we find it leads us to. I hope you guys join me. I think it'll be a lot of fun. I want to have a lot of people on this channel, so I hope whoever's watching this subscribes, and I think this could be really awesome. Anyway, hope to see you guys in the next few videos.